Welcome back, dear listeners, to another thrilling episode of Tales Plus. If you thought last time was strange, buckle up, because things are about to get even weirder.
Oh, absolutely. Let's recap real quick. A mysterious woman appeared out of nowhere, spoke to the fish.
Which begs the question, was this a one-time event? Or will this strange woman return when the fish hit the pan?
Only one way to find out. So, sit back, relax, and let's jump right back into the story. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman turned, lifted her cane, and struck the frying pan. In an instant, the pan flipped, sending the fish tumbling onto the floor, burned black as charcoal, and without another word, she stepped back through the wall and vanished, as though she had never been there. The cookmaid, still shaken from her first fainting spell, opened her eyes only to see the fish completely ruined. Her heart sank, her hands shook, and with a cry of despair, she collapsed again. But before she could wake again, the wazir arrived, expecting to collect the king's meal. He entered the kitchen, only to find the cookmaid collapsed on the ground.
Up, woman! Where are the fish for the sultan?
The cookmaid stirred, her eyes fluttering open. And then, as the horrors of what had happened flooded back, she burst into tears.
My lord, I don't know what happened. A woman. A strange woman. She came through the wall. She spoke to the fish, and they answered her, and then she destroyed them and vanished.
The wazir stared in disbelief. His eyes darted from the ruined fish to the trembling cookmaid, and finally he muttered to himself,
This is no ordinary matter. This is something beyond understanding.
And so the wazir summoned the fisherman once more. When the fisherman arrived, the wazir said to him,
You, fisherman, you must bring me 4 more fish exactly like the ones you brought before.
Without question, the fisherman rushed to the lake. He cast his net, his heart pounding with uncertainty, and when he pulled it back up, there they were. 4 fish, identical to the first, exactly as they had been before. He carried them straight to the wazir, who now stood with the cookmaid at his side. The wazir crossed his arms, his voice filled with suspicion.
Now, cookmaid, this time you will fry them before me. I must see this with my own eyes.
And so the cookmaid had no choice. She cleaned the fish, prepared the pan, and placed them over the fire, her hands trembling as she watched them sizzle. But she knew, deep down, that something was about to happen. The fish had barely begun to cook when, just like before, the wall split open. A cold wind rushed through the room, and there she stood again. The same mysterious woman, dressed exactly as before, her blue fringed headscarf flowing, her rings and bracelets gleaming, and in her hand the same rattan cane. The cookmaid froze, unable to breathe, unable to look away, but the woman paid her no mind. She stepped forward, lifted her wand, and once again thrust it into the frying pan.
O fish, be ye constant to your olden covenant.
And then, just as before, the fish lifted their heads, their eyes glowed, their mouths opened, and in one voice they spoke.
Come back and so will I. Keep faith and so will I. And if you faint forsake, I'll requite till quits we cry.
And then, just as suddenly as she had come, she was gone. The wall was sealed shut, and the room fell into silence. But outside, the first light of dawn crept through the palace windows. And so, Shahrazad paused her tale. She continued the next night. When the fishes spoke, and the mysterious woman vanished just as before, the wazir could stay silent no longer. His face pale, his mind racing, he hurried to the king and told him everything.
O king, this is not something that can be kept secret. You must see it with your own eyes.
If what you say is true, then I must witness it myself. There is no other way.
And so the king summoned the fisherman once more. His command was clear: bring 4 more fish, just like before, and take 3 men as witnesses. The fisherman, still reeling from his luck, rushed to the strange lake and cast his net. And once again, when he pulled it up, there they were, 4 fish, 1 red, 1 white, 1 blue, and 1 yellow. The fisherman returned to the palace, and as before, the king, in his excitement and curiosity, ordered him to be given 400 gold pieces. Then, turning to his wazir, he said,
Now, fry the fish right here before me. I wish to see it all for myself.
The wazir obeyed, his hands steady but his mind uneasy. He cleaned the fish, set them in the frying pan, and placed them over the fire, and just as before, it happened. The wall did not just split open, this time it burst apart, as if the very stones had been torn asunder. And instead of the mysterious woman, something else emerged. A massive figure, towering over them like a mountain of stone. His skin was dark as night, his arms thick as tree trunks, his face set with piercing eyes, and in his hand a living green branch. The king and his men stood frozen. None dared to speak, but the giant figure stepped forward, and in a thunderous voice he cried,
O fish, O fish, be ye all constant to your ancient covenant.
And then, just as before, the fish lifted their heads, their eyes glowed, their mouths opened, and in one voice they spoke.
Come back and so will I. Keep faith and so will I. And if you faint forsake, I'll requite till quits we cry.
And now the king had seen it, with his own eyes. And then, just like before, the massive figure stepped forward. He lifted his green branch, struck the frying pan, and the fish were ruined. Without another word, he turned and vanished, the wall sealing itself shut behind him.
The king rushed forward, staring at the charred black remains of the fish. His face darkened with confusion, his mind raced, and finally he turned to his wazir, his voice firm and shaken all at once. This is beyond belief. There is something hidden here, some marvelous mystery behind these fish, and I will not rest until I uncover the truth.
And so he ordered the fisherman to be brought before him. When the man arrived, the king's gaze bore into him.
Fie on thee, fisherman! Where did you find these fish? Tell me now.
The fisherman swallowed hard, suddenly feeling as though he had made a grave mistake. But he had no choice but to answer.
O mighty Sultan, these fish came from a tarn hidden between 4 heights, just beyond the mountain that lies in sight of your city.
And how far is this place?
A mere half-hour walk, O king.
The king's eyes widened. A place so close, yet so unknown. Without another word, he commanded his men.
Prepare to march. Horsemen, mount up. We ride at once to this tarn.
And as the king and his army prepared to depart, the fisherman led the way. But as he walked, he muttered under his breath, cursing the Ifrit who had led him into this strange and dangerous fate. And so the king and his men rode forth, following the fisherman as their guide. They climbed the mountain, their steeds kicking up dust, their eyes scanning the horizon, and then, as they descended, they saw it. A vast uncharted desert lay stretched before them, a land none had ever seen, and at its center, nestled between 4 towering mountains, the mysterious Tarn. The king and his warriors reined in their horses, their eyes widening in shock. They gazed upon the hidden lake, its waters gleaming strangely under the sun, a sight so surreal it felt as though it belonged to another world. And then, as their eyes adjusted, they saw the fish. 4 fish, swimming in its untouched waters, but each one a color unlike any fish they had ever known. Red, white, yellow, blue.
Has anyone among you ever seen this place before?
O King of the age, never in our lives have we set eyes upon this lake.
Determined to uncover the truth, they called upon the oldest men they could find, elders who had lived long before the king himself. But even they, their faces lined with age, their minds filled with memories of ages past, all answered the same way. A lake like this, in this place? Never, not in all my years. The king's breath slowed. His eyes darkened with resolve. And then his voice rang out with absolute certainty. I will not return to my capital. I will not sit upon my throne until I uncover the truth behind this tarn and the fish that dwell within it. And so the king made his decision. He ordered his men to dismount, their horses settling into the desert sands. All around the mysterious mountain, his army set up camp, their torches flickering against the growing night. But while his men prepared for rest, the king's mind was restless. Something about this place called to him, demanded answers. So he summoned his most trusted wazir, a man of sharp wit and great wisdom, and he spoke in a voice low and firm.
Wazir, I have made a decision. I must go forth alone tonight and uncover the truth of this tarn and its fish with my own eyes.
My king, alone. This is too dangerous. Let me send guards with you.
Number, no one must know of this. You will sit at my tent door and tell all who ask, emirs, wazirs, nobles, and chamberlains alike, that the sultan is unwell and will see no one. This is my command. You will not oppose it.
The wazir lowered his head, for he knew there was no stopping the king's will. And so the king changed his robes, leaving behind his royal ornaments. He slung his sword over his shoulder, tightened his boots, and stepped into the shadows of the night. For the rest of the night he climbed, his feet digging into the rocky path, the moonlight guiding his way. When morning came, he stopped to rest, his body aching, but his determination unwavering. Then, with the rising sun, he continued on. He walked through the second night, the silence of the land thick and heavy. With each step, the air grew strange, the weight of the unknown pressing against him. And just as the third dawn began to break, he spotted something. A small black dot, far in the distance. His heart quickened, and he whispered to himself,
Could this be it? Perhaps someone there will finally tell me the truth.
As the king pressed on, the black shape on the horizon grew clearer and larger, and when he finally stood before it, his breath caught in his chest. Before him stood a palace unlike any he had ever seen. Built of dark stone, its walls glistened with iron plating, reflecting the morning light like a fortress of shadow and steel. One massive gate stood wide open, silent and inviting. The other, shut tight.
What is this place? Who built such a fortress in the middle of nowhere?
The king's spirits soared. This must be the place where he would find answers. So he stepped forward and rapped a light knock upon the great door. No answer. Frowning, he knocked a second time. Still nothing. He knocked a third time, louder now, his fist striking iron. Silence.
Is this place empty?
Summoning his courage, he stepped forward, passing through the open gate into the grand hall beyond. The air was thick and still, as though the very walls had been frozen in time. The king called out, his voice echoing through the vast, empty space.
Holla, people of this palace, I am a stranger and a traveler. Does anyone here have food for a weary guest?
His words rang out, bouncing off marble floors and gold-starred silken drapes. But no reply came. He called again, louder this time, and again. Silence. Still the king would not turn back. With each step he felt both wonder and unease, for the palace was magnificent, its tapestries rich, its furnishings lavish. But where were its people? Where was its master? And why did it feel as though someone was watching? As the king walked deeper into the palace, his eyes widened in astonishment. Before him lay a spacious courtyard, grand and open, flanked by 4 magnificent saloons, each with a raised dais, their golden pillars standing as if waiting for guests who never arrived. A canopy of fine silk stretched overhead, its delicate weave shielding the courtyard from the sky. And at its very center, a fountain unlike any he had ever seen. 4 golden lions, their forms carved in red gold, stood in a perfect circle, their open jaws spouting streams of water, clear as pearls, shining like liquid gemstones. Around the palace, birds fluttered freely, their feathers vivid with color, their songs sweet yet eerie in the emptiness. But when they tried to take flight, they could not. A golden net stretched above them, a delicate but unbreakable cage, keeping them trapped in a paradise of silence. The king marveled at all he saw, beauty beyond imagination, wealth beyond measure. And yet his heart grew heavy, for everything was here except people, not a single soul to answer his questions, not a single voice to tell him why this place existed.
This palace, this tarn, these strange fish, who built this, and why is it abandoned?
As the king stood between the great doors, lost in thought, a sound broke the silence. Not footsteps, not whispers, but a voice. A voice full of sorrow, filled with deep, aching grief. And it began to chant in the air, not from the halls, not from the walls, but as though the very stones themselves were weeping.
I hid what I endured from him, but fate has brought it to light, and sleep has fled my weary eyes, turning my nights to endless night. O world, O fate, restrain your hand, spare me from your harm and spite. Look upon my suffering soul, pale in color, trembling in fright. Could you not show mercy, O fate, to one who walked love's endless way, fallen from wealth and honor bright, cast to the lowest depths to stay? I envied even the passing breeze when it touched the one I adore. But fate strikes down the proudest soul, leaving eyes blind forevermore. What shall the archer do in war when his bowstring snaps in two? How can a man fight destiny when fate decrees what must ensue? When burdened youth is crushed by grief, where shall he run? Where shall he hide? No escape from what's been written, no safe place where fate's denied.
The king's heart pounded as the haunting voice filled the air. Rising swiftly to his feet, he followed the sound, his boots echoing against the silent floors of the strange palace. And then he saw it, a heavy curtain drawn over a doorway, its fabric swaying ever so slightly, as if something or someone waited just beyond it.
Who is there?
His fingers tightened around the fabric. He took a deep breath and lifted the curtain. And there, seated upon a low couch, was a young man, a youth of striking beauty, his posture noble yet sorrowful, his presence as if carved from poetry itself. His forehead shone like polished ivory, his cheeks flushed with the warmth of petals. A single mole, dark as night, round as a drop of ambergris, rested upon his cheek, a mark so perfect it could have been placed there by the hand of fate itself. The king's heart swelled with joy at the sight of the young man. At last he had found someone who could tell him the truth of this place. Yet as he stepped closer, his joy faded into concern. For though the youth sat adorned in the finest of silks, his caftan woven with golden threads from Egypt, and upon his head a crown encrusted with the rarest gems, his face bore the undeniable weight of sorrow.
Peace be upon you, O noble youth.
The young man returned the greeting with elegance and grace, his voice soft, yet heavy with sadness.
O my lord, thy great dignity demandeth that I rise to greet thee. But I beg your pardon, for I am unable.
You are excused, O youth. Think of me not as a ruler, but as a guest. I have traveled far, drawn by the mystery of this tarn and its strange fish. By this palace, by your lonely presence here, and by the sorrow that lingers in your voice. Tell me, who are you, and why do you weep so?
When the young man heard the king's words, his body shuddered with pain, his eyes filled with tears, and soon they fell in heavy streams, soaking the rich fabric of his robe. Then, through his weeping, he spoke, not in explanation, but in poetry.
Say to him who sleeps in peace while fortune's arrow flies, how many has this shifting world laid low? How many rise? Though thine eyes be closed in slumber, the Almighty never sleeps, and time is never fair, nor fate a friend one keeps.
The king stood still, his breath caught in his chest. For behind these words lay a sorrow deeper than he had imagined. And now he could not turn away. He had to know. What tragedy had brought this young man to such grief? The young man let out a deep, sorrowful sigh, one that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 griefs, and then, his voice heavy with pain, gave way to verse.
Confide thy case to him, the Lord who made mankind quit cark and care, and cultivate content of mind. Ask not the past, nor how nor why it came to pass. All human things by fate and destiny were designed.
The king stood motionless, watching as the young man's eyes filled once more with tears. And finally, he spoke.
What maketh thee weep so, O young man?
How should I not weep, when this is my fate?
And with that, he lifted the hem of his robe, and the king's breath caught in his throat. From his navel to his head, the young man was as any other, a man of striking beauty and grace, but below his waist, he was stone. His legs, his feet, lifeless, unmoving, turned to solid rock. The king staggered back, his hands trembling. His quest had been for answers about the mysterious fish. Yet now he had found something far more tragic, something that made his own sorrow feel small.
God, woe upon woe. O youth, you have added sorrow upon sorrow to my heart. I sought only to unravel the mystery of the fish, but now I must know your story as well. For there is no majesty and no might save in God, the glorious, the great. Tell me, I beg you, what has befallen you? What cruel fate brought you to this?
The young man lifted his gaze, his eyes locked onto the king's, his voice quiet, yet unwavering.
Lend me thine ears, thy sight, and thy insight.
All are at thy service.
And so the young man drew a slow breath, as if gathering the pain of his past, and finally he began.
Right wondrous and marvelous is my case, and that of these fishes. And were it graven with gravers upon the eye corners, it would serve as a warner to whoso would be warned.
How is that,
And with that, the young man's tale began, A story so unbelievable, so heartbreaking, that the king would soon wish he had never asked.
Wow. Just when I think we've heard the strangest story yet. This happens. Every tale is stranger than the last.
I know, right? We came here to solve the mystery of the enchanted fish, and now we're staring at a young man half turned to stone, drowning in a sorrow deeper than the sea.
And did you catch that last part? His words.
If my story were graven upon the eye corners, it would serve as a warning to all.
That can only mean one thing. What we're about to hear is not just any tale. It's going to be something beyond imagination.
But if you want to hear what happened to him, you'll have to wait for the next episode.
Trust me, you do not want to miss this. So follow, subscribe, and make sure you're here when the young man begins his tale.
Until then, let this story linger in your mind. And remember, some truths are too strange to believe, but too powerful to ignore.